Hello, this is Russell Moore, and you're listening to Signposts. Those who have who've been around me for a while know the kind of music that I like, so you'll understand what I mean when I say this. When I look back at the year 2017 in my life, I started the year off feeling like Hank Williams at the end, in the back of the Cadillac headed through West Virginia. And I ended the year feeling a lot more like Jimmy Buffett, hopeful and happy and rested. And a lot of that had to do with this guest that we're about to have on the program right now, because I was exhausted. I was stretched way, way too thin. And in the middle of that, a friend of mine, Justin Taylor at Crossway Publishers, I think knew that, and he said, "Hey, you might like to read this book that we're about to publish." And so he sent me the galleys for a book called "Reset: Living a Grace-Paced Life in a Burnout Culture" by David Murray, who's the guest that we have with us today. David Murray is professor of Old Testament and practical theology at Puritan Reformed Theological Seminary. You have probably read other stuff that he's written or heard him speak or preach at a conference or online. And so he sent me this book, and that's kind of a vulnerable thing to do, to say to somebody, "Hey, I think you probably need to read this book on burnout." But Justin had enough confidence, I think, that our friendship could take it, that if I had received it badly, we would survive. But I didn't receive it badly, and I read that book and found it immensely helpful. And then actually in March of that year, went up to Grand Rapids and met with David. He was really gracious to host me in his home for an entire day as we just sort of walked through schedule and walked through issues of life. And so I think there are a lot of you right now who need to read this book, need to hear some of the things we're going to talk about right now. And there are some of you who don't yet, but you will at some point later on in your life, or you have somebody in your life who does. And so, David, thanks so much for being with us on Signpost today.
Russell, thank you for that very warm introduction. I have no idea what your musical references were, but everything else I understand. Yeah, it was a blessing for me to meet with you too, Russell. And as in all these situations, we learn from one another. And it was a very happy memory that day. And it was just a great day of Christian brotherhood and mutual support.
There are a lot of people, I think, who are listening to this who are going to end up talking to someone who is, if not burned out, someone who is just overtaxed and tired and exhausted and all sorts of different situations. So think about when I walked into your door at your house that day. You didn't necessarily know what was going on with me, but you were able to, in talking to me, sort of figure it out and give some really good counsel and very practical advice. How would someone do that? I mean, what sorts of things do you look for in someone's life to figure out, is this person too busy, or is this person in some other situation? How do you figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, through my own personal experience of burnout, Russell, and then just talking to many men in similar situations over the years, there are some patterns that begin to emerge, just some commonalities that, eventually once you know what to look for, they're pretty obvious. And, I just usually walk through a few areas, just starting really with the physical,
Mm.
just things like general ill health, back pain, stomach cramps, lack of sleep. Then moving into the mental realm, lack of concentration, being distracted, maybe obsessive thoughts, bit negative, and then just go through a range of things in emotions, relations, work, what's happening at work, moral issues, spiritual, and very rarely does someone light up on every single one of these. But
Mhm.
I think just trying to help men see uh, objective reality. Because sometimes, men, especially say like yourself, Russell, very strong-willed, determined, and disciplined. We can push ourselves
Hmm.
even when we've got warning signs. And so I think sometimes just to hit the buffer, pause, and begin to look at things with the help of someone usually alongside us, just to help us be honest.
Uh-huh.
And of course, you need some, as you mentioned earlier, vulnerability, a humility to just say, okay, speak into my life and help me to hear.
Now you mentioned men. Does this sort of thing tend to exhibit itself differently often in men and women in terms of how they experience this sort of exhaustion or burnout?
There's some overlap, maybe 50% overlap, but
Mm,
there's another 50% that's pretty gender specific,
mm,
both in causes, symptoms, and cures as well. So yeah, I think you've got to be sensitive to the differences that God has built into us, and for that reason, I think men are usually better at helping men, and women are usually better at helping women. And my wife wrote a similar book called Refresh because we felt that women needed it as well, and yet
mhm.
the man's book just didn't quite hit that spot.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you mentioned in the book, really, really helpfully, you sort of go through a page after page of warning signs, of ways to look at one's life and to try to discern whether or not one's in a danger pattern here when it comes to burning out. What are some of the warning signs that someone should look for?
Yeah, it varies depending on each man. There again, there's overlap, but I think we've always got to be conscious. We're dealing with very unique individuals, so not everyone fits the same pattern.
Hmm.
But what I've noticed in men is, what's usually sacrificed is sleep, um, a weekly day off, time with your wife, and dates or date, time with family, and even just simply things like anger. I think that if there's a uniquely male manifestation of burnout, stress, depression, anxiety, it's probably anger, irrational, excessive anger
Mm,
over minor things. And when I've walked men through this, what usually happens is by the end of it, men are sort of sitting there with their eyes popping and their mouth open,
mm,
like, wow, I did not realize I was so unhealthy. But it's sort of an honesty check.
yeah,
And again, like Russell, ministry is such an enjoyable job.
yeah.
It's so satisfying, and so that energy can keep us going beyond our human limits.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you mentioned in terms of these warning signs, and you referenced it just a few minutes ago. Some exhibitions of anger or of irritability or of frustration. How can someone tell whether or not that's a manifestation of something external going on in one's life that needs to be altered? And if that's just, as the New Testament would put it, a quarrelsome person, for whom that's really a deep-seated moral and spiritual issue. How does one discern that?
Yeah, I usually try and talk of three dimensions. So, okay, you've got all these warning signs, but you're looking at length. How long does it go on for?
Mm,
You're looking at breadth. So, how many of these do you have? If you've only got one, it's unlikely that you are burned out or stressed, for example.
yeah.
And also depth. How intense, how hot, how concentrated are these experiences? So, yeah, we all have bad days. We all have weaknesses in our temperament. But I think if you use these dimensional aspects, you begin to get a better handle on just what is, yeah, just part of our sinful humanity, and what is now into the realm of a problem that is beginning to incapacitate us or destroy us or others in our lives.
Mhm. And I think you should, I think you're right that you should take into account temperament. For instance, I'm somebody who's never had a problem with anger. I don't lose my temper. I don't. I think that people around me would say that they don't see me angry and upset and yelling at people or anything like that. But one time, my fourth son, when he was really, really little, he may have been in kindergarten. He is temperamentally the most easygoing, warm, jovial one of all of my children, and he said he was talking about something that his teacher had said in class, and he said, "I just smiled and nodded, but I thought on the inside, we'll see about that." And I thought, that's me. Often that's the way that frustration manifests itself. It's not in some visible temper, but there's an inner sort of numbness that can come about. And I think there are probably a lot of people who are like that that would think, well, I'm not sort of falling to pieces the way that some people I've seen in my life have. Instead, I'm just numb.
Yeah, I mean, Russell, before I met you, I honestly, I used to watch your ministry online and on CNN and places like that and think, how does he do it? Like, how do you maintain unfailing cheerfulness in the face of just onslaught and controversy and fighting for the truth? And God has definitely given you a calling and a temperament that matches really, really well. And I think you're actually quite unique in that. There aren't many like you. And yeah, so you're right. Your manifestation of this is going to be different, but I would still say that's quite rare. I think the majority of men are more on the irritable, angry side of the
Mm,
spectrum
mhm.
as a result of burnout and stress. But yeah, I think to be sensitive to the unique way God has made us, and yeah, maybe it'll manifest itself in different areas of life in different ways.
Yeah, it's something that you talk about later on in the book about people pleasing, and I really paid attention to that section because that's a weakness and a vulnerability for me is the sense of wanting to be received, wanting to be accepted by people, and that can be an exhausting sort of life, regardless of whether people receive you or they don't. It's still equally exhausting in some ways because if somebody's given toward people pleasing and doesn't please people, then they feel as though their life is a wreck. And if they do please people, then that becomes their employment is in pleasing people. And of course, as followers of Jesus Christ, we're called to please him. But that's hard to do. How does somebody sort of try to evaluate, am I unduly in bondage to a people pleasing sort of mentality? And if so, how do I start to get over that?
Yeah, we we all, to one degree or another, struggle with this. Um, I think especially in ministry, where so much of your effectiveness depends on your ability to connect with people and keep relationships going, then we're probably particularly vulnerable to that. And I think that for myself, at least, Russell, and I can't speak to this for everyone, but I've noticed for myself that my people pleasing tends to really grow and strengthen the further I am away from a daily constant connection with God.
Mm.
And just trying to live that coram deo life, that life before God, not just having a personal devotional time and going to church, but actually trying to live that whole life in the fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of wisdom, and building that God consciousness, so God becomes big and people become smaller. And I don't think that makes you careless about people's thoughts towards you and their feelings towards you, but it just gets the priority right.
Hmm.
So I don't know what you found, Russell, as a help, but I know for myself, when I'm falling into that bondage, it's time for me to really work on that daily connection and communion with God.
Mm. What are some ways that you would recommend to do that? I mean, how do you make sure that you are in the Word of God, that you're regularly praying, that your prayer life doesn't become stale and rote? What are some suggestions that you might have for people?
Yeah, I suppose I'm a method guy. I
Hmm.
can't rely on spontaneity and sort of flashes of inspiration rarely in my life. So I have to build a fairly regulated approach to this, which can become legalistic if you let it, but I don't think it need to become legalistic. So yeah, I would want to start the day with God, and that means before the internet, before email, before social media. I've noticed a huge difference in my day
Mm.
if I get that order right,
Hmm.
for both good and ill. And again, talking to a lot of men through the years, that is often where it goes wrong from the very beginning. Just that, it's as if every day we start with a blank sheet, and what is the first impress that goes on it in the day
Mm.
is really, it stamps the day, whether it's
Hmm.
the world or the word.
Mm.
And so that's where I begin. And then I've just tried to, sometimes I've done even ridiculous things that might seem to some people, but set an alarm on my phone so that, every hour I'm reminded, okay, just even take a minute to pray and reconnect with God. Or I
Mm. Hmm.
associate that with, say, having a coffee, which I do far too much through the day, but
Yeah.
the benefit is you begin to pray more. And so for me, I've got to
Wow.
associate it with someone.
If I start to do that and pray every time I have coffee, I am going to be a prayer warrior for sure. That that is a good suggestion.
Or let me add in one more. And again, this is what I'm working on just now. Whenever I go to social media, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, either replacing that with prayer or preceding it with prayer. And
Uh-huh.
again, it's not about praying, about going onto social media, but it's just using that as a trigger, a
Yeah.
bad habit, as it were, to trigger a good habit.
Yeah. Now, a lot of it, I'm actually surprised. You brought up social media. I'm surprised by when I'm talking to people and encouraging people behind closed doors, whether in ministry or not. I'm surprised at how often social media is actually at the forefront of that sort of burnout and exhaustion, and that really it seems to apply to people no matter what their situation is. I've talked to a pastor who is really just beaten down because he has people in his church who are sort of constantly critiquing him on social media, and so he's kind of constantly watching that in a way that I'd say, "Stop even looking at it." Or I've had people who don't have anything like that going on, but they're just watching what is happening in other people's lives and start to feel empty, about their own life. How should somebody start to figure out how to manage social media in a way that's healthy, without leading to something bad?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a challenge, as you said, it's facing not just ministry leaders, but men, women, kids everywhere. I think it is largely the greatest cause of anxiety and depression in teens today. I would trace to social media.
Mhm.
I think that the data supports that. We were never designed to know so much.
Mm.
We were just, God never meant us to have so much information in our daily lives. If you actually look at the gigabytes of information that we process each day compared to even 20 years ago, it's of a magnitude of something like 9 or 10 times more. And we just haven't become bigger brained people. We're just squeezing a lot more in there. And and it's also about the quality of the information that's going in there. If it was all the word of God or good books or good podcasts, that's one thing, but it's not. It's the trivia, it's the false, it's the fake, and it's really devastating. Not just to spiritual health, as you said, but mental health,
Yeah.
emotional health, relational health. And thankfully, I mean, the secular world is, I think, ahead of us here in a way. I've seen increasingly endeavors to really get this under control and get some good habits in life. I think future generations will look back on our generation and just think, you were mad. You were
Yeah.
absolutely crazy to think that you could live life like that and get off with it. So there's lots of good helps out there. And a level, the TechWise family has been a big help to me and my
Hmm.
family. That's by Andy Crouch, I
Yes.
think.
Yes.
So I would just start with a simple book like that and really implement his 10 commitments one by one. And I think you need your whole family on board and try and lead your home to digital health and through that emotional and spiritual health too.
What would you advise to parents, or maybe, I mean, we have people who listen to this who are teenagers themselves, and we have others who are parents of teenagers. Uh, Often it seems that that sort of performance kind of mentality, I have to achieve, I have to accomplish, I have to win, it starts there, if not before. So what would you say to someone who is or who is parenting a teenager to say, "Here's how you get a hold of that now."
I think it actually starts with the parents, Russell. The pressure that the best intentioned parents are putting their kids under
Yeah.
is beyond. It's intolerable. I mean, when I was growing up, that's only 30, 40 years ago. I don't think it's not exactly medieval times. I think I had only 2 seasons of exams in my whole year at school. So Christmas time and summertime.
Yeah.
In between time, hardly had any quizzes, tests, assessment. So I'd really only 2 peaks in my year. Uh, Now I look at my kids going through school. I've got 2 grown-up boys, but 2 teen girls at the moment. Every single day they have to be on their game
Yeah.
for school. As tests and quizzes and exams and assessments. GPA constantly at the forefront of their minds.
Mhm.
And I think parents can sometimes be partly to blame for that. The pressure being put on them to excel and get scholarships, and it's not enough even to get a 4.4, 4.5.
Yeah.
You've got to be in sports, you've got to be doing voluntary work, you've got to be involved in the school, you're trying to build this resume to get into college, and it's just no wonder that they're crumbling. And
Yeah.
I think there's a big responsibility in parents to really take the pressure off, to give unconditional love and acceptance, regardless of GPA and results, and assure them God will look after you, God will take care of you, work within your human limits, and trust God.
Yeah.
So then it becomes an exercise of faith.
Yeah. One of the best things for me has been, and as I look back over the last couple of years, I can say this is one of the greatest blessings to me when it comes to managing this sort of thing is a small group of friends. We get together. Actually, we just got together the night before last. We do about every week or so, or two, or so. And right now we're this sounds really nerdy, but we're nerds. Right now we're reading through T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, and taking one each time, and talking about it. But we always deviate off into all sorts of other things. That's one of the things that I'm the kind of person who typically, if there's some sort of obligation or event or what, and it gets canceled, I'm kind of relieved because I have that time back to do what I want. If that ever gets canceled, I'm kind of crushed, and it's a
Right.
situation where, yeah, I'm the only non singer songwriter in this group of 5 or 6 guys, and so it's a really busy group of people touring and doing it. Trying to find the time together to do that is hard, but we do it, and that is something I wouldn't give anything for. But I think that there are a lot of people, especially men, for whom finding friendship, especially the older they get in life, is really difficult. Do you have any words of counsel or advice for someone who would say, "I really do need those sorts of friendships and relationships, but I don't know how to start"?
Yeah, I've got a chapter in Reset on relationships because I found myself, I sacrificed friendships in the past for the sake of ministry opportunities. And just realizing that although, I have a very happy marriage, I've got a wonderful wife, I do need men in my life. And I've made a much bigger effort to do that. And for me, a lot of it's actually been through fishing.
Mm,
Going up north in Michigan, and usually not with Christians, actually, just
yeah,
Michigan men, your classic, um, uh, sort of even working class Democrat, Roman Catholic, probably the Trump voters, that have come over to Trump, that kind of
hmm,
demographic. It's really good for me to mix with Christians, non-academics. I don't have to perform. I'm not there for counseling. I'm not there to minister. It's just men being men and just relaxing and on the
yeah,
river in God's creation with people that are just salt of the earth,
yeah.
just classic patriotic Americans. And I find that just so incredibly refreshing. And it's not a discipline for me to do it now. It used to be like you've got to force yourself to go and do this, David, take the
Hmm.
time off. Now I need it, and I know I can't survive without it.
I have a friend who was participating in a volunteer fire department where nobody else there was a Christian, and he built these really, really strong and solid relationships, and he was able to be. It was good for him, and he also was able to be in a situation where he wasn't known as a
Yeah,
minister. They
yeah,
didn't know what he did, so it didn't put
yep,
those barriers up until he was preaching at a church, and one of these guys' wife had brought him along with her, and he suddenly saw him and thought, "Oh no!" And thought back to everything he had said in front of him and so forth, and it was. But that was the way that he found to come in and to sort of disconnect himself from his role
yeah.
and,
It's
and to connect
so
with people.
relieving.
Yeah.
And fishing's my way, but there's lots of ways to do that. One of my friends has started doing martial arts locally and just find
Mm.
it a great way to you get the physical exercise, he gets time with his sons, he's making some progress in something, he's learning, but most of all, it's just people who would not normally be mixing with. And I think that is really key, especially for ministry leaders,
Mhm.
to get out of our Christian bubble and just get amongst people that and it enriches your ministry too. It's not totally detached. You come back to ministry aware of need far more,
Yeah.
and forced to connect with different language, and it's a very wholesome, edifying relationship that can be built.
Well, the book is Reset: Living a Grace-Based Life in a Burnout Culture by David Murray. I really, really recommend this book to you, and Refresh by his wife Shauna as well. And so check those books out. I think they could really, really be helpful to you now or in the future or in helping you to sort of bear with and carry the burdens of somebody that you love. David Murray, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Russell. It's a pleasure.
This is Russell Moore, and you've been listening to Signposts.